morning sun burned across the sprawling Navy base in San Diego, reflecting off rows of armored vehicles and meticulously polished Humvees. Recruits hustled in formation, their boots pounding against the asphalt, while drill instructors barked orders with a cadence sharp enough to make nerves quiver. The smell of diesel, sea air, and sweat hung in the warm breeze, mingling with the occasional metallic tang of weaponry freshly cleaned. For most, it was just another morning of structure, discipline, and mind-numbing routine. For Jake Turner, a cocky new contractor from Texas, it was a stage, and he intended to play it. Jake adjusted his mirrored sunglasses and strode toward the main security gate, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his worn cargo pants. The sun glinted off the silver badge clipped to his belt, which he had been issued for his new contract work, overseeing the installation of new drone hangars. He had been briefed on base protocols, but Jake considered most of it optional. Authority, he believed, was a concept designed to be tested. He smirked as he spotted her. The female guard standing at the gate exuded a calm authority that seemed to slow the very air around her. Her uniform was crisp, her boots perfectly polished, and her posture was military precise. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her eyes scanned every ID with a meticulous focus that betrayed years of experience. The name tag read S. Daniels, and beneath it, a small ribbon cluster hinted at more than just gate duty. She didn't flinch, didn't glance up. She simply kept scanning the badges as if the world existed only in the IDs she held. Jake's lips curled into a grin, the kind that usually accompanied a joke at someone else's expense. Gatekeeper or doll? He muttered under his breath, loud enough to carry a hint of condescension. His eyes swept over her stance, over the way she didn't react to his comment, and a thrill of anticipation ran through him. He had done this before, teased guards, flexed a little charm, gotten the reaction he wanted. But something about her stillness, her quiet intensity, made him pause for a fraction of a second. Daniel's voice cut through the morning bustle, calm and firm. "Sir, this is a restricted area. Step aside." There was no hesitation, no edge of anger, just a simple statement of fact. Jake laughed, the sound rolling out too easily in contrast to her measured composure. "Relax," he said, flashing a cocky grin. "It's just a joke." He expected a reaction, a glare, a sharp retort, something to satisfy the ego he'd carried with him for years. But Daniels didn't blink. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if studying him the way one might examine a puzzle that had no immediate answer. The brief pause was enough to unsettle him. Her silence was louder than any insult could have been. Nearby, a group of young sailors noticed the exchange. Their casual curiosity shifted into subtle attention. They instinctively recognized the tension in the air. In this world, respect wasn't demanded, it was earned, and Daniels radiated it effortlessly. Small nods passed among her fellow guards, subtle acknowledgments that something significant was unfolding. To the untrained eye, she was just another gate guard. But for those who knew the language of the military, she was a presence that demanded recognition. Jake, oblivious at first, began to sense the shift. He leaned against the side of his truck, casual demeanor in place, but his grin faltered ever so slightly. "What's your deal, anyway?" he asked, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Security school? Little training course?" Daniels didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward the back of his truck with a precision that suggested habit and discipline. Jake followed the motion. Curiosity piqued, amusement still lingering. Inside the truck were crates and toolkits meant for the drone hangar installation. Nothing illegal, nothing threatening. Yet Daniels inspected each item meticulously, her fingers brushing against equipment with an expertise that made Jake's smirk falter further. As she worked, Jake noticed subtle things, the way other guards instinctively deferred to her. The brief nods, the subtle shift in posture that acknowledged her authority. He realized this wasn't just a gate assignment. This was someone who had earned respect long before he arrived. "Where'd you serve?" he asked, trying to regain control through conversation, though his tone carried less mockery than before. "Afghanistan," she replied flatly. "Twice." The words hit Jake like a cold slap. He opened his mouth to respond, to make some clever remark, but the weight behind her calm delivery silenced him. He had grown up around bravado, around men who measured courage by loudness or swagger. He had never faced someone whose authority was absolute, quiet, and earned in the crucible of war. And now he was confronted with it, standing casually in front of him like a living lesson. Daniels returned her attention to the crates, her movements efficient, almost ritualistic. Jake watched, the adrenaline of mockery replaced by a creeping unease. She handled each piece of equipment with the precision of someone accustomed to life-or-death stakes. This was no gate guard playing dress-up. This was a soldier, a survivor, someone who had been tested far beyond anything Jake could imagine. A convoy of black Humvees rumbled into the compound, their engines a low growl that echoed across the asphalt. SEAL Team 5 disembarked, patches gleaming, rifles slung, movements precise. They saluted Daniels with a level of respect that made Jake's chest tighten. One tall, scarred man grinned broadly. "Major Daniels. Didn't know you were back stateside." Jake froze. "Major?" His gaze darted between them, disbelief gnawing at him. The men laughed, slapped each other on the shoulders, their camaraderie obvious. "Heard you pulled 3 pilots out under fire near Helmand." "Whole squad still talks about it," the SEAL said, clapping Daniels on the back. She shrugged modestly, as if her actions were nothing extraordinary. Jake's smirk had completely vanished. He realized in an instant that his earlier jokes, his casual disrespect, had been profoundly ignorant. He had laughed at someone who had faced real danger, someone who had risked life and limb in ways he could not comprehend. The humor that had felt so safe just moments ago now seemed grotesquely inappropriate. Daniels turned to him, meeting his eyes with calm authority. "Sir, please proceed," she said. "You're cleared." The words were simple, professional, but carried an undeniable weight. Jake's throat tightened. Respect, he realized, was not about gender, attitude, or bravado. It was earned in fire and action, and Daniels had done so with a quiet, unyielding force that left no room for pretense. As he drove through the gates, the reality of what had transpired settled heavily on him. Behind him, the SEALs exchanged quiet smiles, approving of Daniels' measured handling of the situation. For the first time in his life, Jake experienced the humbling power of genuine respect. Daniels returned to her post, scanning the horizon with the same meticulous precision she had shown all morning. She had done her duty, professionally, without fanfare. Yet, in that simple act, she had delivered a lesson Jake would not forget. Courage does not need to shout. Authority does not need to boast. Respect is quiet, unwavering, and undeniable. And in that moment, as the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Jake Turner understood that he had just encountered someone who had lived a life far beyond his comprehension. A true hero. Standing calmly behind the gate, Major Daniels. The woman who commanded respect without ever asking for it. Jake leaned against the side of his truck, still processing what had just happened at the gate. The morning sun reflected off the metal surface, almost glaringly, as if mocking his stunned expression. He had walked in confident, cocky, certain that charm and bravado could buy him respect. But now, standing there, he felt a creeping unease, a hollow pit forming in his stomach. The casual smirk he had worn like armor just minutes ago felt laughably out of place. He had mocked someone who had faced true danger. And she hadn't flinched. Not once. Daniels continued her inspection of the truck's contents with clinical precision. She opened the back of the vehicle and checked each crate methodically, handling the tools, wires, and heavy equipment with a meticulous care that implied experience far beyond what her gait assignment suggested. Jake tried to maintain his posture, leaning casually, but the meticulousness of her movements unnerved him. Each inspection, each precise touch of her hands on the equipment, carried weight, a subtle but unmistakable aura of authority. It wasn't just professionalism. It was the demeanor of someone who had survived far worse and demanded excellence, even in the smallest tasks. "Everything here seems in order," Daniels finally said, her voice even but firm. Jake blinked, surprised. He had expected her to give him a cursory glance, perhaps bark a few instructions, and move on. But her thoroughness had been unnerving, every gesture deliberate, every observation precise. He wanted to joke, to regain some of the bravado he had lost, but the words stuck in his throat. His tone felt heavy. "You're serious about this?" Jake finally said, forcing a grin. His voice lacked conviction. Daniel's eyes met his briefly, sharp and unwavering. "Sir, this is a restricted facility. Everything must be accounted for. Safety, security, accuracy, non-negotiable." Her tone left no room for argument. Jake felt the weight of her gaze, a silent authority that seemed to measure him, not just his words, but his very character. He laughed nervously, a sound that immediately felt hollow. "Right, safety, security," he said. "I get it. Don't worry, I'm professional." He tried to lean back against the truck, but the presence of Major Daniels, calm and unwavering, forced him to stand straighter, to behave in a way he wasn't used to. Her professionalism was magnetic, commanding attention effortlessly. He realized that trying to be cocky around her was pointless. For a moment, he studied her closely, trying to find something, anything, that would make her human in the way he understood human. She was meticulous, precise, and unflinching. Her eyes scanned every corner of the truck, every crate, every tool, and yet, when she glanced at him, they seemed to pierce straight through his facade. It was unsettling. Jake swallowed hard and leaned in, trying to regain control of the conversation. "So, what did you do before this? Security school? Military police?" He grinned, trying to make the tone light, casual. He was fishing, hoping to find some flaw, some hint that she was just a gate guard in uniform. Daniels straightened, her calm aura unbroken. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "I served overseas, twice, Afghanistan." Jake froze. Twice. The words landed heavier than any insult or bravado could. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the person in front of him, a woman calmly checking a truck, with the image of someone who had faced real combat, someone who had lived through danger that he couldn't even imagine. He wanted to say something clever, but cleverness seemed insignificant here. Before he could muster a response, a low rumble echoed across the compound. Jake turned his head as a convoy of black Humvees approached, engines growling, tires kicking up gravel. The vehicles stopped with precision near the gate, and a team of men in desert combat gear disembarked. The patches on their shoulders read SEAL Team 5, and their movements were deliberate, trained, and precise. They carried themselves like men who expected chaos but created none. One of the SEALs, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, approached Daniels. "Major Daniels," he said, grinning broadly. "Didn't expect to see you back stateside this soon?" Jake's stomach dropped. "Major?" His grin faltered as disbelief washed over him. He had mocked a gate guard moments ago, unaware that the woman in front of him was a retired major, a decorated combat veteran. The SEAL's casual familiarity with her further emphasized the gap between his assumptions and reality. Pulled 3 pilots out under fire near Helmand. The SEAL continued, clapping her on the back. Whole squad still talks about it. You didn't need to come back, but glad you did. Daniels shrugged slightly, almost embarrassed. Just doing my job, she said calmly. No grandeur, no boasting, just understated professionalism. Jake's smirk disappeared entirely. The bravado he had clung to so tightly moments ago was gone. Every joke, every condescending remark, every mocking gesture now felt hollow and foolish. He realized he had stepped into a world far beyond his understanding, one where courage, skill, and leadership were earned in fire, not flaunted in idle words. He wanted to retreat, to escape the weight of this new reality, but he couldn't move. It was as if the air itself had changed, charged with the silent authority of someone who had survived far beyond the comforts of civilian assumptions. Jake had always thought he understood strength. Daniels had just taught him how wrong he had been. Daniels turned to him, meeting his eyes with calm clarity. "Sir," she said, her voice firm, "but even you are cleared to enter." "Please proceed." Jake's throat tightened. The words were simple, professional, but the weight behind them was immense. Respect, he realized, wasn't about gender, age, or bravado. It was earned through action, experience, and quiet confidence. Daniels embodied it fully, commanding it effortlessly. The SEALs exchanged knowing smiles behind him. Jake realized, painfully, that he had been mocked by his own assumptions and outclassed without her needing to raise her voice. The lesson was complete. Respect wasn't demanded. It was observed, absorbed, and acknowledged. As Jake drove slowly through the gate, the weight of the morning pressed heavily on him. Behind him, the rumble of the Humvees and the steady stance of Daniels remained imprinted in his mind. Her presence had delivered a lesson far sharper than any reprimand or argument could have. For the first time, Jake understood that courage wasn't loud, authority wasn't aggressive, and respect, real respect, was earned silently, proven through action, and observed in those who carried it. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching sight of Daniels returning to her post, scanning the horizon with meticulous precision. The sun gleamed on her badge, on her uniform, on the quiet strength she radiated effortlessly. A moment was simple, almost mundane, yet it burned into him with intensity. A war hero standing calmly at a gate, Major Daniels, delivering an unspoken truth that would not be forgotten. The rest of the morning passed in a blur for Jake. He moved with a new awareness, noticing the subtle nods other guards gave her, the way recruits instinctively straightened when she passed, the quiet authority that emanated from every measured movement. Every detail reinforced what he already knew. This was not a woman to be underestimated. Not in the slightest. Even after the convoy left, even after the chatter of the base returned to its usual hum, the weight of what he had witnessed lingered. Daniels had not spoken loudly, had not boasted. She had merely been herself, precise, calm, and competent. And in that, she had demolished assumptions, dismantled arrogance, and demanded respect in a way Jake Turner would never forget. For the first time in his life, Jake realized that he was no longer just on a military base. He was in a world defined by discipline, courage, and experience that he had only glimpsed in movies or read about in news articles. And he had been shown, in excruciating clarity, the cost of ignorance and the power of quiet, unwavering authority. As he settled into his tasks for the morning, the lesson replayed endlessly in his mind. Every joke, every smirk, every idle insult had been a misstep, and every glance at Major Daniels reminded him of the standard he could never meet on his own terms. Respect, he realized, was not a choice. It was an obligation, one that Daniels commanded effortlessly, silently, and absolutely. By late morning, the initial tension at the gate had settled into a quiet rhythm, but Jake Turner's mind was still racing. Every detail from the encounter lingered: the calm authority of Major Daniels, the precision in her movements, the way the SEAL saluted her without hesitation. He had entered the base thinking he understood hierarchy, strength, and respect, but in just a few minutes, those assumptions had been shattered. Every step he took now was measured, careful, aware that he had brushed against someone whose experience far exceeded his own. Jake walked toward the storage yard to unload the crates for the new drone hangar project. He tried to focus on the task, but every glance toward the gate reminded him of Daniel's presence. Upright, sharp, and undeniably commanding. He wondered how someone could carry so much authority without ever raising their voice. Her movements were economical, precise, yet radiated confidence that demanded attention. He couldn't remember ever feeling so outclassed by someone he had assumed was just a gate guard. When Daniels approached him, motioning for him to open the back of his truck, he felt a mixture of curiosity and unease. He complied, flipping the latches and swinging the doors open. Inside were crates of tools, wires, heavy machinery, everything required for the drone hangar installation. Daniels leaned forward, her eyes scanning each crate, her hands brushing over equipment with meticulous attention. Jake couldn't help but notice her posture, the subtle way she carried herself, as if she were evaluating not just the cargo, but the man responsible for it. "Everything looks intact," she said, her voice calm but firm. "No discrepancies. Proper handling, correct labeling, well prepared." Jake forced a grin, trying to reclaim some of his earlier bravado. "Thanks. I do try." His words felt hollow, even to him. The respect she commanded wasn't something he could earn with charm or wit. It came from experience, from having faced danger, having led, and having survived. Daniels straightened and took a step back, studying him with quiet precision. "Sir," she said finally, "do you understand why these inspections are important? This is a restricted facility. Accuracy and safety are critical. Even a small oversight can have serious consequences." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I get it." The words felt inadequate. He had always thought he understood responsibility. He had led small teams, managed projects, and handled risk before. But in this environment, surrounded by men and women who had literally faced life-or-death situations, his previous definitions of responsibility seemed trivial. He watched as Daniels continued her inspection, opening each crate, checking contents against the inventory list, double-checking labels. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, a reflection of discipline honed under extreme pressure. Jake realized that every gesture, every glance, every tiny adjustment she made had been drilled into muscle memory over years of rigorous training. This wasn't mere procedure. It was habit born from experience, from situations where a single mistake could mean death. Jake finally spoke, almost hesitantly. "So, where did you serve before this?" He tried to sound casual, but the question came out awkward, betraying his curiosity. "Afghanistan." "Twice," she replied flatly, without any flourish. Jake's grin faltered. Twice. The weight of the words sank into him, leaving him suddenly aware of the gulf between their experiences. This wasn't about training exercises or simulated drills. This was real. He had laughed at her moments ago, mocked someone who had faced real danger, someone who had survived situations he couldn't even imagine. And now, confronted with her history, he felt the hollow punch of embarrassment and awe at the same time. The yard fell quiet, except for the faint hum of distant machinery and the crunch of boots on gravel. Jake couldn't think of anything to say. He wanted to laugh, to joke, to break the tension, but every instinct to charm or mock him faltered in the shadow of her calm, unwavering presence. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to assert dominance. Her authority was self-evident, absolute, and silent. For several minutes, the two of them moved in careful, measured rhythm. Daniels checking the crates, Jake standing, awkwardly, attempting to appear competent despite the growing weight of intimidation. He couldn't escape the gnawing awareness that he had underestimated her, that his previous assumptions about her gender, her role, and her abilities had been completely wrong. Then, a low rumble shook the yard. Jake turned to see another convoy of black Humvees approaching, kicking up gravel and dust. The engines roared, deep and purposeful. From the vehicles, men in desert combat uniforms disembarked with flawless precision. SEAL Team 5. Jake watched, frozen, as the team approached Daniels and saluted with unmistakable respect. One of the SEALs, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "Major Daniels," he called with a broad grin. "Back stateside earlier than we expected." Jake's stomach tightened. "Major?" His smirk, the one he had carried as armor, completely vanished. The SEAL's familiarity with her, their casual but unwavering respect, made his earlier jokes look like childish impertinence. His mind raced, attempting to process the reality of who she was. A decorated combat veteran, someone who had led missions, survived ambushes, and earned titles that carried real weight. The scarred SEAL slapped her shoulder playfully. "Heard you pulled 3 pilots out under fire near Helmand. Whole squad still talks about it. You didn't have to come back stateside, but glad you did." Daniels shrugged lightly, her composure unshaken. "Just doing my job," she said quietly. Her understatement made the story of heroism even more impressive. There was no need for exaggeration, no need for performance. Just pure, unembellished professionalism. Jake swallowed hard. His earlier laughter, his mocking remarks, even the casual confidence he had worn like armor, all felt hollow. He had entered this base believing he knew respect, responsibility, and courage. In less than an hour, all of those notions had been dismantled. He had laughed at a hero, mocked someone who had faced unimaginable danger, and now the gravity of his ignorance weighed heavily on him. The SEALs laughed quietly among themselves, not mocking Jake, but sharing camaraderie and appreciation for Daniel's authority and skill. She had walked among them with silent strength, commanding loyalty without needing to assert it aggressively. Jake realized that his bravado was meaningless here. Respect couldn't be taken. It had to be observed and earned, and she had earned it many times over. Daniels finally turned to Jake. "Sir," she said, voice calm and precise, "you are cleared to enter. Please proceed." The simplicity of her statement carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Respect didn't require loud declarations or posturing. It was measured in action, in composure, in competence. And she carried it effortlessly, as if it were a second skin. Jake felt a hollow sensation in his chest, a mix of admiration, guilt, and humility. He drove through the gates slowly, glancing back at her standing silently at her post, scanning the horizon, unwavering. The base around him seemed different now, sharper, more defined. Every detail, from the deference of her fellow guards to the precise movements of the SEALs, reinforced a lesson Jake could never unlearn. Courage wasn't loud, authority wasn't aggressive, and respect could not be faked. By the time he reached the storage yard, the reality had sunk in fully. The morning had been more than an ordinary start to a workday. It had been a lesson in humility and observation. Jake realized he had encountered someone who had lived life far beyond his comprehension, someone whose presence alone demanded acknowledgement. He tried to focus on unloading the crates, but his thoughts kept returning to Daniels, Major Daniels, and the quiet power she carried. He thought about the soldiers she had led, the missions she had survived, and the unspoken authority she now wielded over everyone around her. He understood, with a clarity that left him both awed and humbled, that she had stepped into this gate assignment not because she had to, but because she could, and because the world around her deserved the order and discipline only she could provide. Jake worked in silence, moving with a newfound awareness, watching Daniels from the corner of his eye. Her presence had reshaped his understanding of strength and leadership. And as he went about his tasks, he realized that nothing about the morning would ever leave him. Not the convoy, not the jokes that had died in his throat, not the quiet, devastating authority of a major who had survived war and commanded respect without ever asking for it. The rumble of the Humvees still echoed in Jake Turner's ears as he tried to focus on his tasks. Each engine's growl seemed to reverberate, not just across the tarmac, but in his chest. A constant reminder that the world he had stepped into was not a game, not a simulation, and certainly not a place where arrogance could thrive. The gates behind him stood firm, and at the center of their discipline, the woman he had so casually mocked earlier remained upright, immovable, and utterly unshakable. Jake's attention flicked back to Major Daniels. She moved with an efficiency that seemed almost instinctive, glancing briefly at her clipboard, checking the perimeter, and then returning to her silent watch. Every gesture, from the subtle tilt of her head to the way she shifted her weight, radiated authority. The SEAL's obvious respect for her only amplified the weight of her presence. Jake couldn't escape the realization that she had led men in war zones, commanded operations under fire, and earned loyalty without ever needing to assert it with words. Major Daniels. A voice called, sharp and familiar. Jake turned to see Chief Reyes, the scarred SEAL from earlier, striding toward her with a grin that carried a mix of camaraderie and admiration. Still on gate duty? I thought you'd be retired, maybe sipping coffee stateside by now. Daniels didn't break her composure. Temporary assignment, she said smoothly, almost nonchalantly, as if leading a platoon in the desert were a trivial matter. Command asked me to oversee security upgrades. Nothing more. Jake's stomach tightened further. The casual way she downplayed her accomplishments was almost unbearable to watch. He had thought he understood leadership. Now he realized he had only scratched the surface. Leadership, he understood, wasn't about titles, ego, or bravado. It was about action, authority, and the quiet assurance that comes from surviving situations no civilian could comprehend. Reyes clapped her shoulder lightly, laughing. You've still got it. Word travels fast. SEALs talk, and your name comes up, always with stories that make us shake our heads in awe. 3 pilots, right? Helmand? Daniels gave a small, understated nod. I did what I had to do. Jake's jaw tightened. He had mocked her only hours earlier, confident that a few words and a smirk could diminish someone's presence. Now he understood how foolish that had been. Her calm, understated authority was a force in itself, something no amount of swagger could counter. He felt a flush of embarrassment, a gnawing awareness that he had underestimated the depth of her experience. He watched as she gestured toward the SEALs, instructing them with subtle hand motions that communicated volumes. Each movement was deliberate, precise, almost ritualistic. It wasn't simply command. It was the language of someone who had led in combat, who had relied on instinct honed by necessity, and who expected excellence without needing to shout for it. Jake realized that every joke he had made, every casual insult, now rang hollow in comparison. Reyes noticed Jake's gaze and smirked knowingly. Don't worry, Turner, he said lightly, almost teasing. We all had to learn the hard way. Jake could only nod, feeling smaller than he had in years. He had thought he was confident, in control, capable of navigating any environment with his charm and experience. But Daniels had dismantled all of that effortlessly, simply by existing in her world, by carrying herself with the silent authority of someone who had faced death and survived. The SEALs gathered their gear, preparing to move toward the drone hangar for the day's inspection. Daniels followed, her eyes scanning the perimeter, assessing the situation, anticipating risks Jake couldn't even begin to imagine. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, calculated. He felt like a child trying to keep pace, overwhelmed by the weight of experience and competence that radiated from her. Jake finally broke the silence, his voice tentative. "Major, what made you come back stateside? I mean, why gate duty?" Daniels glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "Some habits don't fade," she said simply. "Command needed me here, overseeing security. It's temporary, yes, but necessary. Sometimes the simplest jobs require the most attention. And some things, like keeping people safe, never truly end, no matter where you are." Jake swallowed. Her words carried a quiet power, almost philosophical, and the weight of them pressed down on him. He had thought safety was a matter of protocol, rules, and compliance. Daniel's presence reminded him that safety was also about vigilance, intuition, and experience that could not be taught in manuals or classes. He followed at a respectful distance as she moved toward the hangar. Each movement, each glance, each subtle adjustment she made spoke volumes. She checked the perimeter, noted the positioning of equipment, ensured every crate and tool was properly accounted for. It was routine to some, but to Jake, every action felt like a demonstration of mastery, of skill, authority, and the ability to command respect without ever needing to assert it. As they reached the drone hangar, Jake finally saw the full scale of what they were dealing with. Massive equipment, cranes, delicate electronics, and military-grade drones stood ready for deployment. Each piece required careful handling, strict adherence to protocol, and absolute precision. Daniels moved through it all effortlessly, instructing the SEALs and junior personnel with concise hand gestures, brief verbal cues, and the kind of authority that left no room for mistakes. Jake felt both awe and intimidation. The weight of her presence was overwhelming, a constant reminder of his earlier misjudgments. He realized he had underestimated the subtle power of experience, the quiet confidence that comes from surviving extreme situations and earning respect the hard way. Daniels didn't need to shout, argue, or prove anything. Her competence did it for her. The SEALs began preparing for the day's operation, moving drones, calibrating equipment, and checking every detail with disciplined precision. Daniels oversaw the process like a conductor of a complex orchestra, every movement synchronized, every instruction precise. Jake felt increasingly out of place, aware of every misstep, every hesitation in his own movements. He had come here thinking he was prepared, but he now realized that true preparation was measured not by confidence, but by experience, vigilance, and mastery under pressure. At one point, a young sailor approached Daniels with a question about calibration. She responded with clarity, patience, and authority. If the sensor isn't aligned properly, even the smallest deviation can cause catastrophic failure. Adjust it carefully. Double check before moving to the next phase. Jake could hear the confidence in her voice, the implicit command that demanded attention and obedience. It wasn't arrogance. It was expertise. Jake's mind raced. He had laughed at her mere moments ago. He had assumed she was just a gate guard, someone to dismiss casually. Now he watched as she commanded respect effortlessly, her authority unquestioned, her competence undeniable. Every step, every glance, every word carried weight. By mid-morning, the full scope of Daniel's presence had settled over him. He realized that he had entered a world far beyond his understanding, a world where courage, leadership, and respect were earned through experience, tested under fire, and proven in moments of crisis. He had been confronted with someone who had not only survived, but thrived in that world, and now stood quietly, confidently, commanding attention without a single raised voice. Jake swallowed hard, feeling a profound mixture of humility, admiration, and self-reproach. He had mocked her without understanding her history. He had underestimated her without a second thought. And now he understood that respect was not a gift, a courtesy, or a response to bravado. Respect was earned, and she had earned it in ways he could never begin to comprehend. As the team prepared the final equipment, Daniels moved between them like a shadow, observing, guiding, correcting, commanding. Jake followed at a cautious distance, each step a reminder of his earlier arrogance, each glance at her a lesson in authority. He realized, painfully, that he had much to learn, not just about protocol, or machinery, or procedure, but about life, courage, and the quiet strength that defines true leaders. By the time they concluded the morning's inspection, Jake Turner had been transformed. The arrogance and bravado that had defined his entrance were gone, replaced by a quiet awareness of the true nature of respect, authority, and leadership. Major Daniels had shown him, without raising her voice, without boasting, and without even intending to teach, that experience, courage, and competence spoke louder than any words could. As Daniels returned to her post after overseeing the operation, Jake lingered in the hangar, silently absorbing the lesson. He realized that this morning had been more than a professional encounter. It had been a confrontation with truth, humility, and the undeniable power of experience. And he would never look at leadership, respect, or courage the same way again. By mid-afternoon, the drone hangar hummed with activity. SEALs moved with precise coordination, checking equipment, running diagnostics, and preparing for the day's operations. Jake Turner followed at a cautious distance, still trying to process the morning. He had entered the base brimming with confidence, sure that his experience and charm could navigate any situation. But Major Daniels had dismantled that arrogance piece by piece, her quiet authority leaving him both humbled and fascinated. Every movement, every glance, every instruction she gave carried weight far beyond the gates or the hangar. It was the product of a lifetime of experience. Chief Reyes approached Daniels as she oversaw the final calibration of a drone. "Still doing gate duty?" he teased lightly, clapping her on the shoulder. His grin carried genuine warmth and camaraderie. "Thought you'd be retired, maybe sipping coffee somewhere nice." Daniels shrugged lightly, her composure perfect as always. "Temporary assignment," she said evenly. "Command wanted me here. Overseeing security upgrades and ensuring protocol is followed." Jake swallowed, feeling the weight of every word. Gate duty. Temporary. A phrase that sounded almost mundane, almost trivial, but in her hands, even the simplest assignments were infused with gravity and precision. Every action she took demonstrated mastery, whether in combat or in coordinating the movement of delicate military equipment. Reyes smirked knowingly at Jake. "This one," he said quietly, "is a legend. Don't let the uniform fool you. You've just met someone who's lived more in 3 tours than most people could imagine in a lifetime." Jake nodded, feeling a flush of both awe and shame. He had laughed at her earlier, assuming she was a typical guard, someone to mock or underestimate. Now he understood the breadth of her experience, the depth of her authority, and the quiet confidence she carried with her everywhere she went. As the SEALs worked, Daniels moved seamlessly between them, offering guidance with subtle gestures, concise commands, and calm corrections. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Each movement was authoritative. Each glance communicated intent, and every instruction carried the weight of someone who had survived chaos, danger, and the weight of responsibility in war zones. Jake realized, painfully, that he had misunderstood leadership for years. He had equated strength with confidence, authority with volume, respect with bravado. Daniels had demonstrated that true leadership was earned, silent and undeniable. She didn't demand recognition. It was given freely by those who understood her experience, her courage, and her competence. During a brief pause in operations, a young sailor approached Daniels hesitantly. "Major Daniels." "Sir, I'm unsure about the calibration on this drone sensor. Should we adjust it manually?" Daniels crouched slightly, inspecting the instrument carefully. If the sensor is misaligned, even slightly, it could compromise the entire operation. Adjust carefully, then double-check. Precision is more important than speed. Accuracy over haste. Do you understand? The sailor nodded quickly, relief and respect evident in his expression. Daniels stood, dusted off her hands, and glanced over at Jake. "Every task matters, Turner. Even the smallest misstep can have consequences you may not foresee. Remember that." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. Her words hit him like a hammer. He had approached the morning with arrogance, thinking his casual competence was sufficient. Now he understood that every detail mattered. Every inspection, every command, every movement carried consequences beyond his immediate comprehension. He thought back to his earlier joke at the gate. Mocking someone like her, someone who had faced death and responsibility daily, was almost criminal in its ignorance. She had never once flinched at his comments, never once raised her voice, and yet she had demonstrated authority so clearly that his own bravado seemed pathetic in comparison. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. Jake watched as Daniels corrected errors silently, instructed the SEALs with precise movements, and maintained oversight over every aspect of the operation. It was mesmerizing, and at times intimidating. He realized that she wasn't just a major in title, she was a major in presence, in experience, and in capability. After lunch, they gathered in a shaded area of the hangar. Jake noticed the way the SEALs moved around her, a subtle deference in their body language, the way they listened intently to even the briefest suggestion she made. She had earned it. Every one of them knew she had survived situations they could barely imagine, navigating hostile territory, making split-second life-or-death decisions, leading under fire, and returning home with a calm, unwavering composure that inspired loyalty and admiration. Reyes leaned toward Jake, lowering his voice. "You know, most people never get this close to someone like her. The stories you've heard? They don't capture it. You have to see it to understand. Her calm, her precision, her authority. It's intimidating until you realize it's grounded in experience, not ego." Jake nodded, his hands gripping his clipboard tightly. He felt the weight of his ignorance pressing down on him. For the first time, he understood that leadership, courage, and respect were not things one could demand or fake. They were lived, proven, and earned, qualities Daniels embodied effortlessly. As the afternoon wore on, Daniels led the team through the final stages of the drone preparation. Every instruction was precise. Every correction was subtle, yet absolute. Jake followed, trying to emulate her efficiency, but constantly aware of his shortcomings. He realized that he was learning far more than just procedural skills. He was witnessing the embodiment of discipline, courage, and quiet authority. During a brief break, Jake approached Daniels, hesitant. "Major, I just want to say I underestimated you this morning. I shouldn't have. I get it now. You've earned every bit of respect." Daniels glanced at him, her expression unreadable, then gave a faint nod. "It's never too late to learn, Turner. The important thing is to observe, understand, and apply. Don't make the same mistakes twice." Her words carried weight, almost more than the SEAL's respect or her legendary status. She had distilled an entire lesson into a simple statement, and Jake felt it resonate in a way that would stay with him far beyond this day, this base, or even this job. By the end of the day, the drones were fully prepared. The team had completed inspections, and Daniels had returned to her post at the hangar entrance. Jake lingered, absorbing every detail, every nuance of her authority. He understood, with a clarity he could not ignore, that he had encountered a person who lived beyond assumptions, beyond gender, beyond the casual expectations of civilians. She had survived combat, led operations, and now commanded respect effortlessly, teaching lessons in humility without ever raising her voice. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the hangar floor, Jake Turner felt a profound shift within himself. He had begun the day brimming with arrogance, confident in his experience and charm. He had mocked, underestimated, and laughed at someone who had faced real danger. Now, hours later, he was humbled, inspired, and irrevocably changed. Major Daniels stood silently at her post, scanning the tarmac, calm and unyielding. She had not shouted, not boasted, not demanded respect. And yet, she had commanded it completely. Jake knew he would carry this lesson with him forever. Respect is earned, courage is demonstrated, and true authority is quiet, deliberate, and undeniable. By late afternoon, the drone hangar had settled into a rhythm of controlled efficiency. SEALs moved with the quiet precision of trained professionals, while Major Daniels oversaw each task with the same calm authority that had marked her presence since morning. Jake Turner followed, clipboard in hand, aware of his own awkwardness, but determined to remain competent. Every glance at Daniels reminded him of the gulf between their experiences, a chasm defined not by gender, but by real-world stakes, split-second decisions, and the weight of responsibility carried in life-or-death situations. He tried to focus on the task at hand, ensuring the crates and equipment were properly staged for deployment. Yet every time he glanced at Daniels, he caught a glimpse of her meticulous observation. She wasn't just monitoring the work. She was evaluating, anticipating, correcting. Her authority wasn't loud, it wasn't demanding, but it was absolute. Every subtle gesture communicated command. Every quiet word carried weight. Jake felt like a student in the presence of a master whose lessons were silent but unmissable. As he worked, he reflected on the earlier confrontation at the gate. His smug confidence, the jokes, the casual arrogance, all of it had been dismantled with quiet authority. Daniels had never raised her voice, never shouted, never needed to assert dominance overtly. And yet, the lesson had landed with undeniable clarity. Jake realized that real leadership was not about being noticed. It was about being relied upon, being capable when it mattered most, and carrying the weight of responsibility without seeking recognition. Daniels walked past him, her boots making no more noise than a shadow falling over the concrete. She paused briefly, scanning the drones lined up for inspection. Jake noticed the precision in her gaze, the way she measured distance, the alignment of sensors, the placement of crates, everything observed with near military perfection. He wondered how many times she had done this in combat situations, where one miscalculation could mean the difference between life and death. "You're moving too fast with the crates," she said, voice calm but firm. "Speed is useless if precision is lost. Adjust your stance, maintain balance, and confirm placement before releasing each load. Understand?" Jake nodded quickly. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience he had yet to earn. He adjusted, placing each crate with care, noting the importance of deliberate, careful movement. For the first time that day, he felt himself truly learning, not just procedure, but mindset. The SEALs, observing the interaction, exchanged subtle nods of approval. Reyes caught Jake's eye and gave a faint grin. "Learning fast, Turner," he said quietly. "Just keep your head and watch carefully. She teaches without telling you. Pay attention." Jake swallowed hard. He felt the weight of his earlier arrogance pressing down, mingling with a growing sense of humility. The contrast between what he had assumed and what he was witnessing now was staggering. Daniels didn't need theatrics. Authority came from competence, courage came from experience, and respect was earned, not demanded. Every movement, every glance, every word she offered reinforced that lesson. As the afternoon wore on, the team faced a minor crisis. One of the drones failed a critical diagnostic check, sensors misaligned and software unresponsive. Panic would have been the natural reaction for someone less experienced. Jake felt his own heart race, a cold fear creeping in as he realized the gravity of the situation. A failure here wasn't just inconvenient. It could compromise an entire operation. Daniels moved quickly but calmly, kneeling beside the drone, her eyes scanning the readouts and hardware. She gestured to the SEAL technician next to her. Check the sensor alignment. Recalibrate, then verify each connection. Step back and observe before proceeding. Her calmness was infectious. Panic melted under the weight of her composed authority. Jake watched as the team moved methodically, following her guidance to correct the error. Minutes later, the drone hummed back to life, fully operational. The crisis had been averted, not through loud orders or chaos, but through precise instruction, controlled authority, and experience that could not be questioned. Jake exhaled deeply, aware that he had just witnessed a masterclass in leadership and crisis management. Daniels had transformed a potentially disastrous situation into a controlled, successful operation with nothing more than quiet authority and precise instruction. He realized that leadership wasn't about telling people what to do. It was about inspiring confidence, guiding effectively, and creating order in moments of uncertainty. After the drones were fully operational, Daniels gathered the team for a brief debrief. She spoke succinctly, each word deliberate and informative. Errors are expected. How you correct them defines success. Observe, adjust, and execute. Do not panic. Precision is your priority. Jake listened intently, taking notes in his mind as much as on his clipboard. The lessons he had received that morning had evolved into real, tangible skills: observation, patience, attention to detail, and the understanding that calm authority is far more powerful than loud command. During a lull in the operation, Daniels approached Jake directly. "Turner," she said quietly, "you're improving, but remember, competence is built, not assumed. You're relying on luck when you act impulsively. Watch, learn, and internalize before taking independent action." Jake nodded, feeling a pang of humility and gratitude. He had started the day as a brash, confident man, mocking authority he didn't understand. Now, under Daniel's quiet mentorship, he was beginning to internalize the lessons of precision, vigilance, and true authority. "Don't worry," she added, with a faint hint of a smile. "You'll get there. Just remember, the moment you assume you know it all, you're most vulnerable. That's when mistakes happen." Jake felt the weight of those words. They were simple, yet they carried the gravitas of someone who had lived through far more than he could imagine. Daniels wasn't just teaching protocol. She was imparting wisdom born from life and death experience, from missions where failure wasn't an option, and from years of earning trust and respect. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the hangar floor, the team began to wind down. The SEALs completed final checks, Daniels walked the perimeter, and Jake moved with a newfound awareness of every step he took. He realized he had grown significantly in just a single day. Confidence without humility was dangerous. Respect without understanding was empty. And he had been reminded of both lessons in the most humbling way possible. By the end of the day, Daniels returned to her post at the hangar entrance. She stood silently, scanning the tarmac as the golden light of the late afternoon reflected off her badge. Jake approached her, careful not to break the unspoken rhythm of her authority. "Major Daniels," he said quietly, "thank you. For everything today, I understand more than I ever thought I would. I misjudged you this morning. I won't make that mistake again." Daniels gave a brief nod, her eyes calm but assessing. "Good. Observing and learning is the first step. Acting recklessly will only set you back. Remember that lesson and keep it." Jake watched her for a moment, taking in the quiet power of her presence. He had entered the day with arrogance and ignorance. He was leaving with humility, respect, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to lead, to serve, and to earn authority. As he walked away, he glanced back one final time at Major Daniels. She remained upright, silent, and resolute, the living embodiment of courage, competence, and respect. Jake knew, without a doubt, that the lessons of this day would remain with him for the rest of his life. The following morning, the base was alive with activity. The sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, reflecting off the polished metal of the drones lined up for deployment. Jake Turner arrived early, clipboard in hand, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the previous day. The memory of his arrogance at the gate and the lessons imparted by Major Daniels lingered heavily in his mind. He had entered the base confident, mocking, and dismissive. Now he was cautious, attentive, and respectful. Every movement he made was deliberate, every decision weighed with the understanding that competence, precision, and humility mattered more than bravado. Daniels had arrived minutes earlier, her posture as immaculate as ever. She stood at the entrance to the hangar, scanning the area with the calm authority of someone who had faced danger and commanded lives under fire. Jake paused for a moment, studying her. There was a quiet power in the way she carried herself, a presence that commanded respect without a single raised voice. Her experience radiated from her, visible in every measured gesture and every controlled motion. "Turner," she called as she walked toward him. "You've improved since yesterday. Keep that focus, and don't let distractions compromise your work. Observation, precision, discipline. Remember them." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." The words were quieter than the brash declarations he had made just 24 hours earlier, but they carried far more weight. He felt the gravity of responsibility pressing down, a stark contrast to the confidence he had carried in the morning sun yesterday. As the team prepared for the day's exercises, Jake followed Daniels' lead closely. He moved carefully, checking each drone, aligning each piece of equipment, and ensuring that every action adhered to her exacting standards. The SEALs, aware of his presence, gave subtle nods of approval. Even Reyes, the scarred SEAL who had teased him the previous day, allowed a faint smile, acknowledging Jake's growth. "Good," Daniels said quietly after inspecting one of the drones. "Precision is key. Always remember that." Jake absorbed her words, realizing that leadership wasn't about commands or titles. It was about mastery, preparation, and quiet authority. The previous morning's arrogance and misplaced jokes and the casual mockery had been replaced with careful observation and respect. He understood that competence, not confidence, defined true authority. Midway through the morning, a complication arose. One of the drones malfunctioned during a diagnostic test, its sensors misaligned and systems unresponsive. The tension in the hangar increased subtly. Even experienced SEALs exchanged brief glances, aware that any failure could compromise the exercise. Jake felt his pulse quicken. The shadow of his earlier arrogance threatened to creep back, replaced this time by a cautious fear. He had witnessed Daniels manage crises before, and now it was time to see it firsthand. Daniels moved calmly to the drone, kneeling beside it as if assessing a minor issue rather than a potential disaster. "Check all connections," she instructed the nearest SEAL. "Recalibrate the sensor manually. Verify each link before proceeding." Observe, adjust, execute. The team moved efficiently, following her guidance with precision. Jake stepped forward cautiously, offering assistance where appropriate, but careful not to overstep. He noticed the subtle way Daniels directed them, hands barely moving, voice calm, yet authority unquestioned. Every action carried weight, every correction silent but absolute. He realized that real leadership was invisible in its elegance, commanding obedience through competence rather than intimidation. Minutes later, the drone hummed back to life, fully operational. The near crisis had been averted, not through chaos or loud orders, but through calm authority, precise instruction, and years of battle-hardened experience. Jake exhaled deeply, feeling both relief and awe. He had witnessed firsthand how decisiveness and composure could turn potential failure into success. After the drone incident, Daniels gathered the team for a brief review. "Mistakes are expected," she said simply. "How you respond defines success. Stay calm, observe carefully, and execute without hesitation. Panic is your enemy. Precision is your ally." Jake listened intently, internalizing every word. Each instruction resonated with a lesson far deeper than drone operation. It was about responsibility, accountability, and the weight of actions taken under pressure. He understood now why the SEALs had referred to her as a legend, why even seasoned personnel deferred to her judgment, and why mocking her presence the previous day had seemed almost absurd in hindsight. During a short break, Reese approached Jake. "You're learning quickly," he said, glancing at Daniels. "Not many get it. Most people just see a gate guard. They don't see the major who's led men through hell and back. You've got potential if you keep watching, listening, and absorbing." Jake nodded, humbled. "I see that now. I underestimated her yesterday. Big mistake." Reyes smiled faintly. "Better to realize it now than never." As the afternoon progressed, Daniels continued to guide the team through the final stages of drone preparation. Jake followed closely, noting her precision, patience, and authority. Each correction she offered was subtle but definitive, each gesture deliberate. He realized that the lessons he was learning were not just about operational tasks. They were about the qualities that define true leaders: courage, competence, humility, and respect earned through action rather than demanded. At one point, Jake made a minor error while calibrating a drone. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to fix it, recalling the panic he had felt during yesterday's near crisis. Daniels approached silently, observing him for a brief moment before speaking. "Step back," she said calmly. "Take a breath. Assess, then act. Precision is more important than speed. Do not let haste compromise your work." Jake nodded, taking her words to heart. He adjusted his posture, moved carefully, and corrected the error with deliberate care. When he finished, Daniels gave a faint nod, acknowledging the improvement without a word of praise. The subtle approval carried more weight than any overt compliment could. He felt a surge of quiet pride, tempered by humility and recognition of the authority he had once mocked. By late afternoon, the hangar was finally organized, drones fully operational, and the team's tasks completed. Jake stood back, observing Daniels as she returned to her post at the entrance. She scanned the area with the same calm, unwavering authority that had defined her presence from the moment he first arrived. He felt a deep respect, mingled with awe, for the woman who had silently transformed his understanding of leadership, responsibility, and humility. He approached her carefully. "Major Daniels," he said quietly, "I want to thank you. I understand now. I misjudged you, and I see the truth of your leadership. You've taught me more in 2 days than I've learned in years." Daniels regarded him with her usual calm assessment. "Good. Observing, listening, and applying is the first step. Acting recklessly is what leads to mistakes." Remember this lesson, Turner, and carry it forward. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deeply. He realized that his transformation was only beginning. The arrogance and ignorance he had carried had been replaced with respect, humility, and a determination to improve. He had witnessed leadership in its purest form, quiet, precise, and undeniably powerful. As he turned to leave the hangar, he glanced back one final time. Major Daniels stood resolute, scanning the tarmac, calm and commanding, the embodiment of experience, courage, and authority. Jake knew that the lessons of these 2 days would stay with him forever. Not just about drone operations or military protocol, but about life, leadership, and the quiet power of respect earned through action. He walked away, carrying a newfound understanding. The arrogance that had defined him upon arrival was gone. In its place was humility, vigilance, and an unspoken pledge to apply the lessons of Major Daniels, to act with precision, and to earn respect through competence, not bravado. By the following morning, the base was alive with the soft hum of activity and the metallic clatter of drones being prepared for their missions. Jake Turner arrived early, his clipboard in hand, but this time his movements were deliberate, measured, and free of the brash confidence that had defined him upon arrival. He had entered this world full of arrogance and assumptions, ready to laugh at authority he barely understood. Now, 2 days later, he moved with purpose, awareness, and a profound respect for the woman who had taught him the hardest lessons of his life, Major Daniels. Daniels had arrived minutes before him, standing at her post at the hangar entrance. The sun reflected off her uniform, highlighting the medals and insignia she wore, though she carried them lightly, as though they were symbols of responsibility rather than vanity. She scanned the area with the same quiet authority that had captivated Jake from the first moment. Every movement deliberate, every glance purposeful. Her presence alone seemed to command order, vigilance, and respect. "Turner," she said calmly, acknowledging his presence without a word of judgment. "Your focus yesterday was good. Today, maintain it. Observe carefully, act deliberately, and execute without hesitation. Precision and discipline are your allies." Jake nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am, understood." The words came quietly, carrying the weight of sincerity and awareness. He realized that respect wasn't granted through casual words, but through attentive action, humility, and consistent effort. He felt a quiet determination to live up to the example Daniels had set. As the team began final preparations for drone deployment, Jake followed Daniels closely. He moved with care, checking each connection, aligning each sensor, and verifying each piece of equipment. Every motion, every glance, was informed by the lessons he had learned. Observation, patience, and precision above all. He noticed how the SEALs responded to Daniels' commands, not out of fear, but out of trust and respect earned through experience. For the first time, Jake understood that leadership wasn't about authority or volume, but about competence, composure, and reliability. Mid-morning, a minor complication arose, a communication error between 2 drones. The SEALs exchanged concerned glances, but Daniels approached the situation with her trademark calm. "Check the transmission logs," she instructed, kneeling beside the devices. "Isolate the error, correct the frequency, and verify all systems. Observe, act, adjust." The team moved swiftly, following her precise instructions. Jake assisted cautiously, recalling the panic he had felt 2 days prior. This time, however, fear was tempered by understanding. He acted deliberately, carefully adjusting equipment and confirming connections. When the issue was resolved and the drones hummed back to life, the tension dissipated. The crisis, minor though it had seemed, was a test, a final lesson in composure, observation, and execution under pressure. Reyes approached Jake quietly during a brief pause. "You've changed," he said, nodding toward Daniels. "Not just in skills, but in mindset. Most people don't get this. They see her and assume she's just a guard, or they laugh at the uniform. You've learned the hard way, Turner. You're paying attention now." Jake nodded, feeling both pride and humility. "I see it now. Everything she does is about control, precision, and experience. I misjudged her, big time?" Reyes smiled faintly. "Better to realize it now than never." The rest of the morning passed in a rhythm of quiet efficiency. Daniels moved seamlessly among the SEALs, correcting errors, providing guidance, and observing without intrusion. Jake mirrored her patience, noting every adjustment, every hand signal, every subtle instruction she gave. He realized that the lessons extended far beyond drones and equipment. They were about life, responsibility, and leadership. Every correction Daniels offered, every decision she made, carried the weight of experience honed under fire, in situations where mistakes could be fatal. By afternoon, the deployment exercises were complete. The drones had been checked, calibrated, and positioned perfectly. The SEALs packed up equipment, their respect for Daniels evident in their precise movements and subtle nods of acknowledgement. She returned to her post at the hangar entrance, scanning the tarmac with her characteristic calm authority. Jake approached her cautiously. "Major Daniels," he said quietly, "I want to thank you. I understand now. I misjudged you, I mocked you, and I underestimated your authority. I've learned more in these past 2 days than I ever imagined I could." Daniels regarded him with her steady, calm gaze. "Good," she said simply. "Observing, learning, and internalizing are the first steps. Acting recklessly is what causes failure. Remember this lesson and carry it forward. Competence, precision, and vigilance are what define true leadership. Titles and words are secondary. Actions matter." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into him. He realized that his arrogance had been a shield, a false confidence that he had relied upon without understanding its limits. Daniels had dismantled it not through confrontation, but through demonstration. Her quiet authority, her competence, and her unwavering presence had shown him the difference between assumed respect and earned respect. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of the SEAL's admiration for her. He saw why they deferred to her judgment, why they followed her lead instinctively, and why her presence alone commanded order, vigilance, and trust. Her influence wasn't theatrical. It was built on experience, courage, and the lessons of survival in the harshest circumstances imaginable. As Jake prepared to leave the hangar, he paused to watch Daniels one final time. She stood resolute, scanning the perimeter, her movements precise, her posture upright, her demeanor calm yet commanding. He realized that the lessons of these days were more than professional guidance. They were life lessons about humility, responsibility, and the quiet strength that defines true leaders. Before departing, he approached Daniels one last time. "Major, I want you to know that I will carry these lessons with me. I will act deliberately, observe carefully, and respect authority earned through experience. Thank you for showing me the difference between arrogance and true competence." Daniels gave a faint nod, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement. "Good. Remember, leadership is not claimed, it is demonstrated. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. Carry that knowledge forward, Turner. It will serve you well." Jake turned away, feeling a profound shift within himself. The man who had laughed at her, mocked her, and assumed he understood the weight of authority no longer existed. In his place stood someone more cautious, more observant, more aware of the responsibilities and lessons that define true leadership. As he walked across the tarmac, he glanced back one final time. Major Daniels remained at her post, a living embodiment of courage, competence, and quiet authority. The sun glinted off her uniform, highlighting not just her medals and insignia, but the countless lessons she had silently imparted, lessons earned in battle, refined through experience, and now passed on through observation and quiet mentorship. Jake took a deep breath, the weight of his transformation settling into him. The arrogance of a rival, the misjudgment, the laughter at her expense, all of it had been replaced by respect, humility, and understanding. He realized that the lessons he had learned would stay with him far beyond the walls of the base, far beyond the drone hangar, and far beyond the 2 days that had reshaped his perspective. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Jake Turner left the hangar with a renewed sense of purpose. The presence of Major Daniels, the respect of the SEALs, and the lessons of precision, vigilance, and quiet authority had transformed him. He would carry her example forward, applying what he had learned in every challenge, every decision, and every leadership role he would face in the future. And as the gates of the base closed behind him, he knew, without a doubt, that he would never forget the woman who had shown him the true meaning of respect, courage, and leadership.